Hi, everyone. Welcome back to National Park After Dark. Today, we have a really fun episode because we are doing an interview today.
And not only an interview for like the real day one people, the real OGs, our very first interviewee we ever had on the show.
We're talking to Kevin Grange today, which if you remember, if you were here like back when we very, very first started doing interviews, he was the very first person we interviewed. So it's really, really exciting. But for those of you who might not be familiar with him yet and you are looking for a new book recommendation, we have the perfect interview for you today, which is really exciting. And we'll give you a little overview of who Kevin is before we get started. So you might remember him from our first interviews on the show when we spoke to him about his book, Wild Rescues, A Paramedic's Extreme Adventures in Yosemite, Yellowstone, and Grand Teton. And today we are thrilled to have him back to discuss his newest work, Grizzly Confidential, an astounding journey into the secret life of North America's most fearsome predator.
Kevin is an award-winning author with an emphasis on the medical field, adventure, and travel. But aside from writing, he's a firefighter and paramedic with years of experience in emergency and wilderness medicine. His home base is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where he spends his free time hiking, biking, and exploring the wilderness. He has trekked through the Himalayas, traveled throughout the country in the name of research, has given presentations around the globe, saved countless lives in our national parks, and now he's here today to talk about one of his other passions, which is bears, and why they belong. Kevin, welcome back to National Park After Dark. Hello, Kevin. Welcome back to National Park After Dark. Thank you so much for rejoining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be back and look forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, so you wrote another book.
I did, yeah. I guess it's kind of like finishing a marathon. When you're finished, you're like, I'll never do it again. And then a few years pass and you get excited about another topic and another adventure presents itself. And then next thing you know, you're writing another book.
So I do have to ask, when we spoke a couple years ago, you must have had this idea at least swirling around in your head, or were you already kind of formally working on it? Because we spoke, I think, like 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. So how long have you been working on this one?
Well, I've always been fascinated with bears, grizzly bears in particular. And so I sort of like pitched this idea before I wrote my last book, Wild Rescues, but I wasn't really getting a lot of, correspondence from like the biologists. And I think it's because they were assuming I wanted to write just another story of like the ferocious brown bear or the man killer. So then I wrote Wild Rescues about working as a paramedic in Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Grand Teton. And then this time around, I think they were more receptive because instead of like saying, hey, I want to write this book, I sort of started the conversation with, what do you wish people knew about brown bears? So I was kind of letting them lead the narrative. And then I think the main thing is now, grizzly bear recovery in the lower 48 is like a modern conservation success story. So the bears are beginning to push out from the national parks. And the forefront of like grizzly bear conservation is in these wildland urban communities kind of on the fringe of national parks. And so I think the bear community knows that we need to get the stories out. And, sometimes people are distrustful of scientists and government agencies. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to kind of get the story out in a different way. And that's kind of where like artists and writers come in.
Well, what's so interesting about your book that you did is there's so much research in it, but it's so much firsthand research. I mean, you went to a lot of bear hotspots to be able to write this book, and you talked to a lot of influential people in the bear world. I mean, in your book, you sleep on the ground in the most concentrated area in the world of grizzly bears, and you're going to different sanctuaries and to different talks and all of these things to actually get firsthand real world experience with bears. What made you want to put yourself in all of these situations? I mean, from an outside standpoint, a lot of people have an inherent fear of bears, and to be like, okay, I'll go sleep on the ground, I'll go be face to face with a grizzly bear. What made you want to do that?
Well, I've always loved bears, and in many ways, I kind of look at this book as like a love letter to Bear 399. She's the famous bear who lives in the Tetons and raises her litters by the roadside. And so, as she took her 4 cubs on a walkabout through Jackson Hole, which is where I live, in 2021, through my neighborhood. She was at Josie's Ridge, where I trail run, Munger Mountain, where I mountain bike. I kind of realized that along with being fascinated by bears, I was also very fearful of them. And so I kind of realized, like, this is the new normal. Like, bears are pushing out into these other communities, into my community. And I guess as like a firefighter and paramedic and former park ranger, I've just been trained to like go into those places that scare me, and this idea that like the best way out is through. So I decided, I love brown bears, that I'm going to venture into the wild with biologists and naturalists and guides and just meet the grizzly face to face and see if I can learn everything I can about them, and then see if I can understand them. And then most importantly, see if I can answer that question of how can we coexist. So that's kind of what motivated the journey.
And before we continue on, can you just distinguish for listeners who may not be well versed in the bear world, the difference between when we're speaking of brown bears and grizzly bears? And I know a lot of people are pretty familiar with the distinction between black bears and grizzly bears, but not so much the nuances when we're speaking of brown versus grizzly. And there's a lot of different terms thrown around. So can you just give us a lay of the land?
Sure. Yeah, it can be confusing. A lot of times you hear all grizzlies are brown bears, but not all brown bears are grizzlies. And so historically, the term grizzly bear referred to bears in inland North America, or bears in the interior, whereas brown bear referred to bears on the coast, like the coastal brown bears of Alaska. In the book, and nowadays it's kind of common to use the terms interchangeably because the genetic difference between the two is basically nothing, and they're one species, Ursus arctos. So that's kind of the history. Like, historically, grizzly bears were in the interior, and the brown bears were more on the coast.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. When you have a really busy schedule with your kids, work, family, it's really easy to let go of prioritizing your own needs. Even when we know what we need to make ourselves happy, actually setting time aside for that can be really hard. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Therapy can help you learn how to manage your time better. I know for me, I'm totally a yes person, so when someone asks me to go somewhere or to do something, I'm prone to always saying yes, even if I don't actually have the time for it. Therapy is a great way at helping you learn to set healthy boundaries in a positive way to ensure that you aren't overloading your schedules. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/NPAD today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/NPAD.
You kind of outlined my next question, which was why now for this book. You've kind of laid out a bit of, because bears are now this success story when it comes to conservation, are kind of pushing through the boundaries of national parks, and we're starting to see them in more and more spaces. And obviously that raises concern, fear, questions, all of that with the general public who may not be used to living alongside and among big predators like this. So as part of your writing process, like Cassie kind of touched on, you went to so many different seminars and trainings and conferences and everything from bear human conflict workshops and safety trainings and different sanctuaries and things like that. So are there any of those that remain among the most impactful throughout this journey? I know every single one kind of has its moments and that's why they're in the book. But is there any that really, really stuck with you?
I think one of the main things I learned is, we think of bears as carnivores, but in reality, they're more like opportunistic omnivores. And so they're actually mainly vegetarians. And they do occasionally eat meat and they eat fish as well. But mainly they're just eaten on these vegetarian food sources. So they're not the like carnivore that we see in kind of myth and movies. So of the spots I visited, I think the Human Bear Conflict Conference I went to in Lake Tahoe was really interesting, just to kind of learn like the root causes of human bear conflict. And probably 95% of that is just like not securing food and garbage and compost. Bears having access to beehives and chicken coops. So learning the causes of conflicts, but also the many solutions that are out there that, allow coexistence to be a possibility. Securing food and garbage, using like electrified fences and ranching communities or like Carillion bear dogs. And I think one of the main things from that conference is just, if we want grizzlies on the landscape, it needs to be like a community effort. And so I feel like if I want bears on the landscape, which I do, I also should be willing to help that rancher with a carcass reimbursement program if he was to lose, a cow or something like that, or maybe help reimburse the cost for him to put up an electrified fence, So it has to be a community-wide thing. And another thing is like, I can secure my trash, but if my neighbor across the street doesn't, the plan falls through. So that was really interesting. And then as a paramedic, I treat patients who have diabetes and heart disease and stroke. And when I went to Washington State University's Bear Center, they're doing a lot of like amazing research on hibernation physiology. So like bears put on all this weight each fall, but they don't get diabetes. They can kind of turn that insulin sensitivity on and off like a switch. They also don't get coronary artery disease. During hibernation, they can like slow their heart rate to 8 to 10 beats per minute, yet the blood doesn't clot. So as a paramedic, the idea that brown bears might help treat these human afflictions is just like really fascinating. So the visit there was awesome. And then visiting Brooks Falls at Katmai National Park, it's kind of the home of Fat Bear Week. And that was just amazing kind of seeing these bears I've fallen in love with, like Otis and Grazer and Holly. And there I kind of just saw the idea of bears as like ecosystem engineers, because you'd see the scat filled with seeds, so they're kind of dispersing seeds through the scat, and then you see how like bears scatter all the salmon carcasses, which brings like nitrogen and phosphorus to the forests, and kind of tilling the earth with their claws. So seeing kind of bears affect the ecosystem, and then also seeing an ecosystem like Katmai that's just like firing on all cylinders was really amazing. And then another one, just visiting Doug and Lynn Seuss, who are conservationists, and they train bears for Hollywood films. So kind of seeing those charismatic personalities of bears that, occur when they're not food stressed was really important. And then McNeil River Sanctuary was kind of the place where all the puzzle pieces of this human bear coexistence puzzle came together for me.
You mentioned this very briefly in what you just said, but you mentioned personalities with bears. And I really loved that you highlighted that in your book as well, because I think as an outside person who doesn't see bears very often, most of the time when a lot of people do see bears, it's in a headline, unfortunately. And we don't necessarily hear that they have real personalities. And I'm just curious, what are some of the personality traits that you saw in different bears throughout your research?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in the book, I tried to capture obviously the personalities of the biologists I spoke with, but also like the personalities of the bears. And that was the really fun and amazing thing I saw, that when the bears aren't food stressed, like I caught a few salmon runs right at the pulse. So the bears had just eaten their full. And then they just like this sense of play starts to come out. You can see bears just like doing the backstroke, flopping around with this fish, almost like playing catch with themselves. And, just kind of how they interact with each other, because you think of like bears as kind of being territorial and not sharing space with one another. But when there is a a surplus of food, they don't mind being in close proximity. So you see sort of behaviors that you wouldn't think bears were possible of, whether it's an old boar kind of hanging around with a subadult, where typically you might think, don't the, old male bears kill the young ones? Well, sometimes they do, but sometimes they pal around together, or like, a sow adopting a cub and that type of thing, or family groups just spending time together. So just kind of seeing some of that. But I guess regarding the personalities, I think some of that goofy, just playful behavior that we saw. And then I love the subadults. Those are bears that have kind of been emancipated from mom, but they're not yet adults. And they're kind of like the underdogs of the bear world. And they're just like really goofy, sometimes with huge ears. And, just, I love them just because I love underdogs. And just seeing them trying to learn how to fish was, like heartwarming and fun.
They're still growing into themselves at that point, just trying to figure things out, the lay of the land.
Yeah. And they're also like very curious. So part of this journey was me learning to understand bear behavior. And, when I first saw that subadult approaching us, me and my wife, I was terrified. But then the guide we were with just said, he's not displaying any of the aggression signs of a bear, such as like salivating or jaw popping or hoofing. He's just curious. And so I was able to relax, to just enjoy that moment. And, he walked close, and then, he got really close. And then, we just did a light clap of the hand and scooted off, so it wasn't like, even just a little stimulus can send them on their way.
Yeah, not like having to deploy bear spray to try and get this bear away from you. He's already not agitated, just like letting him know that you're there for him to actually move, which is really interesting because I feel like a lot of times people, as soon as they see a bear, they think that bear spray is the first thing to reach for. And of course, that's something that is good to have with you. But when you say just a quick clap of the hand and the bear takes off is so interesting. And it really highlights, I think, and you talk about this in the book too, but just in this conversation here too, where situationally bear behavior is different. Here, where you're talking about the bears had plenty of food, they had no real habituation to people, where they're used to them being like around all the time, finding food from them. What is the contrast with that? And what is the problem that we see in places like Yellowstone, where people might not see what you're explaining right now and this experience you've had? People aren't seeing that in Yellowstone as much. And why is that?
Well, I think, what I tell folks is like the best way to stay safe in bear country or to view bears, it really depends on where you are. And so like a coastal brown bear who's well fed with, multiple runs of salmon, he's sort of like the, portly guy sitting on his couch with a remote control and a TV. He's just so much more relaxed, and they have a smaller space bubble. So that's different than the Yellowstone bears, which to me are always kind of displaced by humans. Like Yellowstone gets 4 to 5 million tourists a year, and they're also kind of like always food stressed. So they're just a little more on edge. And so I think bear viewing in Yellowstone, it's, you'll see the bears at a distance, and it's good to keep that distance. And then some places like Lake Clark or Katmai or McNeil River, you're able to view bears a little bit more, a little closer, and just kind of in like a different way. So you kind of have a different relationship with them.
In places like Yellowstone, where we have 4 to 6 million people who are visiting every year, what is something that people can do who are visiting to respect the space of the bears while they're there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the main thing is to give them space. Basically bears need a lot of space and they don't like surprises. And so keep at least 100 yards away from them. And then, one thing people don't realize is people who hike have probably been in the vicinity of bears dozens to hundreds of times, but the bear just runs off and you never actually know it, So there's all those times that don't really get reported in the news, but just in a place like Yellowstone, just giving them space, and that can be also on the road, if they're near the road. And then when you hike, just hike as a group, carry bear spray, make noise, just following some of those best practices.
As a person who worked as a vet tech for over 5 years, I have seen the struggle that cat parents have to find the right food for their furry loved ones. That's why I'm really excited to tell you about our next partner, Smalls. It's time to make kibble a thing of the past. Smalls cat food is made with protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients you'd find in your own fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. That's why veterinarians.org rates Smalls 10 out of 10 for their ingredients quality. Smalls, time and time again, is the preferred choice for kitties when it is put side by side with other food. You might be thinking, why should I switch from the kibble I've always known? Because kitties need fresh protein-packed meals. Other companies commonly use mysterious meat byproducts, artificial flavors, and preservatives that just aren't good for your cat's health. After making the switch to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. That's a big deal. The team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product that you can try it risk-free. That means they will refund you if your cat won't eat their food. Now is the time to make the switch to Smalls. Head to smalls.com/NPAD and use promo code NPAD at checkout for 50% off your first order, plus free shipping. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use our code NPAD for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code NPAD for 50% off your first order, plus free shipping.
You have brought up McNeil River a couple times in our conversation, and obviously the whole book kind of culminates to this chapter towards the end of the book, and it's so amazing to hear your perspective on it and your experience there, because I think it's safe to say a lot of our listeners, as soon as you say Lake Clark or Katmai, we know what you're speaking of. Like, we've heard of it. Some of us have probably been there or have plans to go there. But McNeil River Game Sanctuary is a bit different. I would say it's probably way lesser known, and it obviously operates a little bit differently as well, which you go into in great detail in the book. But you say that the way of doing things there is about managing the people and not the bears, and the results that they've had are astounding, really, when you think of it, especially compared to the different human-bear conflicts and situations that you see arise in different national parks and wild spaces in other places in the country. So the success story of McNeil River is quite profound. So can you talk a little bit about how they do things and what an experience there is compared to an experience somewhere else that has bears?
Sure. Yeah, McNeil River State Game Sanctuary is on the Alaskan Peninsula, a little bit north of Katmai National Park. And it kind of affords bears the highest protection. So obviously they're not hunted there, but they're also not even used as, for research. Like, none of the bears are collared or sedated. And so you get there by applying for the lottery. And what occurs is every 4 days, 10 people get to go into the sanctuary and camp. And it's the largest concentration of brown bears on the planet. And so at one time, they saw 74 bears at McNeil Falls feeding, on salmon. So it's just a lot of bears. And the unique thing there, apart from having only 10 people, is you go out bear viewing at the same time every day, and you go to the exact same spots. So over a number of years, this was pioneered by a gentleman named Larry O'Miller. The bears have come to expect that predictability from the viewers. And so they have no reason to fear people, but they also have no reason to desire people, because we've never given them a food reward. We're securing our trash. And so to the bears there, you're just like an anonymous part of the landscape. And they'll just walk right up to you and walk right past you. And when you're bear viewing, you kind of group together. And Larry O'Miller has this quote. He's like, if the bears aren't stressed, I'm not stressed. And if they want to walk up to you and, say hello, then that's kind of what occurs. And so you're able to see these bears at close range. And, and I think the first day I was there, this sow with 2 cubs, she just, turned her back to us, laid down and took a nap, and let her 2 cubs pretty much walk right up to us. So that's the kind of like unique experience that you can have there. So that's amazing. And I guess the question of McNeil is, how do you take the McNeil experience and bring it back home? Because it is unique. There's only 10 people there every 4 days. And like you said earlier, I think I asked Beth Rosenberg, who's the sanctuary manager there last year, and like, how do you manage the bears? And she just said, we don't manage the bears. They're doing 100% of what they'd normally do. We just manage the people. So just having that discipline regarding, food storage and that predictability, you're able to have these amazing experiences with bears. So to me, it kind of showed what's possible. And it also just, again, squashed that myth of bears as just these ferocious animals that want to kill humans. Because, they had, we're in close proximity and they had absolutely no interest in us at all.
Yeah, a completely different approach from what we're used to. And it's working too. If I remember correctly, in your book, you wrote that there has never been a fatal mauling that has happened there. Is that right?
Yeah, there's never actually been a human injured.
Wow.
I think McNeil was created in 1967. So there's never been a human injured. And there's also, equally important, there's never been a problem bear that's had to be removed. And, that's kind of just like this coexistence miracle. But again, it's like, as I was there was a student from Harvard who was doing like a PhD study on McNeil. And, his question was, how do we bring it back? And I think, as we talk about, it's just bringing that discipline back home. And I guess one thing I found in talking to Beth Rosenberg, the manager there, it just feels amazing not to be number one. As humans, we often think of we're apex, we're number one. So it's really cool there to not be number one and to sort of like live in such a way that supports something higher, in this case, bears. And what I love about bears is they're kind of at the top of the food chain. If you can coexist with bears, you can also coexist with all the animals and the plants that fall beneath them.
I think that's beautiful. And I think it's so inspiring. That chapter was particularly inspiring in regards to like, this is possible. And of course, it's I don't want to say a container, but it's definitely a smaller scale. There, like you said, it's a very difficult lottery to get drawn for. There's not a lot of people. They give bears breaks. Obviously, everyone is, when you get there, you go through like the ringer as far as what to do, what not to do. This is what it's all about the people behavior, like what you are able to do and what is expected of you. And I think that a lot of our experiences is not it's not a proactive approach. It's more of a reactive approach. And we keep picking on Yellowstone, but it just happens to be the one place a lot of people encounter bears in the wild. And obviously there are a lot of bears there, but it's more of like, you hear the term like problem bear, and that could be true, but why is that? And it's
Sure.
Mostly always associated with problem human behavior first. And it's so disheartening for people who love and care and respect bears to be, because like you said, just that small example, if I secure my trash, that's great. But if my neighbor doesn't, then the whole thing kind of falls through. And we see that in this grander scale when we're out in national parks and recreating in wild spaces with hundreds, thousands, or millions of other people who may not be on the same page. So it's kind of like, that question of how do we get there? And that's through education. And it's kind of just like a process that we're going to have to slowly move through. And I think reflecting back to, we've talked about this before many times, Cassie and I, of, where we were as a society interacting with bears in the national park system even 50 years ago compared to now. So where we can be 50 years from this point with the information that we know now and different behavioral changes for us as humans, what is possible? And I think McNeil River is just such a cool testament to what we can see on a grander and larger scale in the future if we just put those behaviors to work and actually change them. And part of that obviously is also not only our behaviors, but our view on bears with just all the different nuances and reading their behavior and seeing them as individuals instead of just this big, scary, formidable predator. And I love that your book, because a lot of books about bears are great, But I think what makes yours a bit different is because you start off the book saying, I love bears. I grew up loving bears. I always thought I was a bear person until I was put into living next to bears and putting myself in a situation where I was potentially able to run into one in my day-to-day life. And then you start questioning, am I really a bear person? And I think so many people can relate to that because me and Cassie sit here, yeah, we're bear people. We love bears. This is great. And then as soon as we're camping in Alaska, we're like, are we bear people? Because I'm terrified right now. And I think so many people can relate to that.
Yeah, no, I think I knew I thought I was a bear person, but then once bears were kind of inconveniencing me via where I mountain biked, where I trail ran, then I had to kind of, like you say, reinvestigate, am I really a bear person? And I guess just getting back to McNeil and Yellowstone. I spent the day with Carrie Gunther, the biologist there, and that is a huge success story that they have these millions of tourists. And, I think the stats are like 1 in 59 million people who visits has a bear encounter, or 1 in 29 million who camp in the backcountry. And so like the team there has just done an amazing job with making the right thing easy, bear boxes at the campsites, and the rangers do patrols at night. So the fact that they have so few incidents is really a miracle. Whereas, as you mentioned in the past, they used to have a lunch counter for bears at Yellowstone where they would feed the bears, and there were stands for people to sit and watch the rangers feed so we've come a long way, and like I'm excited like you are about the next 50 years.
Yeah, it's exciting to see the changes, especially when we say the lunch counters and there were viewing points and all these things, to see that the national parks have totally shifted their idea of how to interact and coexist with bears, to see how it is now. And also to hear those numbers that you just said are really encouraging, I think, to people who might be afraid to go into bear country and to go into these parks. I mean, you hear of seeing all these bears in Yellowstone or Glacier or somewhere that has a high concentration of them, but to know that 1 in 29 million chance of having some type of an encounter with a bear is a really good odds that you're safe and you're okay. And to have all these tools implemented that will make you safe, which you definitely highlight in your book as well, is to know all of these things and to have all of this knowledge will make you safer around bears, which also in your book felt like was your journey to learn about bears so you didn't have to fear them anymore. This episode is brought to you by IQ Bar. I love to have a nice cup of coffee in the morning, but it always makes me super jittery and I just can't always do it. So instead, I've switched to IQ Joe from IQ Bar. IQ Joe is a jitter-free instant coffee packed with 200 milligrams of natural caffeine, brain-boosting magnesium, and productivity-enhancing lion's mane. IQ Joe comes in 4 delicious flavors. They have organic black, vanilla spice, cafe mocha, and one of my favorites, toasted hazelnut, and it tastes better than any brewed coffee. IQ Bar also has fantastic IQ mixes for hydration and their plant protein bars for a quick, diet-friendly breakfast. Power up your life with superior brain and body nutrition products from IQ Bar. Their plant protein bars are the perfect low-carb, grab-and-go breakfast. Their IQ Mix, zero-sugar hydration drinks replenish electrolytes lightning fast, and their IQ Joe mushroom coffees are packed with magnesium and lion's mane adaptogens to keep you focused all day long. Start each day right with IQ Bar's brain and body boosting bars, hydration mixes, and mushroom coffees. Their ultimate sampler pack includes all 3. Get 7 IQ Bar flavors, 4 IQ Mix flavors, and 4 IQ Joe flavors. And today, our listeners get an exclusive offer of 20% off plus free shipping. Just text PARK to 64,000. All IQ Bar products are entirely free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial sweeteners. IQ Mix is a zero-sugar drink mix that hydrates with electrolytes, improves mood with magnesium, and boosts clarity with lion's mane adaptogen, which is what makes them so perfect to take out with you on those long camping and hiking trips. Refuel smarter with IQ Bar's Ultimate Sampler Pack. That's 7 IQ Bars, 4 IQ Mix Sticks, and 4 IQ Joe Sticks. And now our special podcast listeners get 20% off all IQ Bar products, plus get free shipping. To get your 20% off, just text PARK to 64,000. Get your discount, text PARK to 64,000. That's PARK to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Now that you have done all this research and have been face to face with bears, what are your feelings towards them? Are you still as afraid as you were when you started this, or do you feel more comfortable?
No, I'm like light years different than I was. And I feel like I'm a lot more comfortable with them, and I'm not terrified of them. I'll always be cautious around them. But I think just, learning about them and what their needs are, and knowing their behavior, and understanding them more, I feel a lot more comfortable. So yeah, I would say I'm definitely a bear person. And, I guess one thing I talk about, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in my book, but just like some of the gifts that this journey gave me and that the bears gave me is it kind of put me in touch with like the wildness of the planet, because you go to these amazing spots. And then from that, I'm just, really drawn to want to conserve this, this amazing planet that we live on. And then a cool thing, I know you guys are like dog people, is the bears world is ruled by behavior. So prior to this journey, I sort of had just like a vocal relationship with animals and my dog Asher, whereas learning the bear behavior and seeing them in relationship with one another, now I have that heightened awareness of like behavior. So like me and my dog Asher, it's now not just vocal, it's like posture and behavior. So this whole new realm of like communication and relationship has opened up, which is really amazing and fun, And then I think another thing is I talk about some of the history of myth and bears, how they evolved. And I talk about the berserkers, which were this, the old Norse warriors who would wear like a bear shirt and go into battle. So one thing I learned, the bears, like they live a harsh life and they have a high cub mortality, but they're very resilient. Like at Katmai, you see them with the scars, and they're just able to like adapt and overcome. And so, whereas the berserkers kind of use that energy to like take life, I've kind of used that energy, I feel, as like a firefighter and paramedic to like help save lives. So like in a way, I kind of attribute that to the bears. And I guess the last thing that this journey gave me is just, I thought I was journeying into the bear world, and I was, but I met so many amazing people. So kind of like the journey into bears revealed some of the best parts of humanity: biologists, wildlife guides, sportsmen, and even hunters who wanted to like protect our planet and protect bears. So that was like another great part of it.
I think that's a great point that you make, especially at the end there, where you say that you form these relationship with hunters, because I think when you talk about conservation and you talk about hunting, you almost put them as enemies, that they can't coexist together. You're either for conservation or you're for hunting. You can't be both. And one thing that I loved in your book is that you really highlight the efforts that hunters have actually gone to and through to preserve animals and to actually take part hugely in conservation efforts. And would you mind just talking about that a little bit, how hunting can actually be, and hunters themselves are part of the conservation efforts?
Sure. Well, as a writer and a journalist, there's sort of this idea of just like follow the story. And so I hadn't planned on putting hunting in the book, but then a number of biologists and some conservationists were like, hey, you really need to talk to like a master hunting guide in Alaska. And so each chapter is kind of like a lens into the brown bear world. And, I personally would not like shoot a grizzly bear. I'm not against all hunting. I just wouldn't kill a brown bear. But I was directed by numerous people like, hey, you got to check out this. So with this idea that I'm just giving perspectives on bears, I went on a Kodiak bear hunt with a master guide named Sam Rohr. And that was just really interesting because I learned how hunting a highly regulated hunt with low numbers in the right place can really improve a community's tolerance for bears. We find it, we love bears, you and I, but to like many people, bears are just like a net loss on the landscape. they have no value. However, if there's a highly regulated hunt, many people do find value in having bears on the landscape. Or if there is a bear causing trouble in town, they have more patience for it. It can also provide like economic stability. And when I went on that bear hunt, they were helping, wildlife officials with a field count of bears. So they were out there in the field helping do a field count, which would help conservation efforts. And then we also ran into a bear that unfortunately had its claws cut off and its head cut off. So it was possibly a poached bear. And obviously we reported it right away. So that whole experience and just kind of learning some of the history of conservation in the US, it started with the Boone and Crockett Club, which was a club of hunters. So I learned how, they can work together in some areas for the positive benefit of bears.
Well, and as you said, you're just providing these lenses into the brown bear world, and that lens exists. So to not include it wouldn't have given a full comprehensive view. And I think that I obviously agree with Cassie that it was nice to have included, even though obviously it's very apparent through your writing that you would not partake in something like that yourself. And I would guess that most readers of this book would fall into that camp as well. But to know that it is part of the brown bear world, and it's important to know that through hunting, there are benefits, whether or not it seems a little counterintuitive, but there are benefits. And one of those benefits you just kind of touched on, which I wanted to touch on as well, was public tolerance for bears. And that obviously is really important as we move forward in the conservation story of bears as a whole, because, a lot of people go to different national parks to view bears, and they kind of are like, okay, well, now I'm gone and I will leave that behind and go back to my life. But in certain parts of the country, there are various reintroduction efforts that are happening that you kind of touch on at the very end of your book, and because obviously they're unfolding and evolving as we speak. But obviously the North Cascades in Washington has just greenlit the reintroduction, and there's talks of a California reintroduction in the near future. So public tolerance is key, because that would never go anywhere if it didn't have public support. And big predators are very divisive. I mean, they always have been, as you touched on in the history of bears in this book. And obviously, as someone who is very involved in the wolf world, same kind of story translates to them as well. So you need to have some sort of middle ground, or we're never going to get anywhere with big predator reintroductions. So can you touch on any of the reintroduction efforts? Like, what are your thoughts and feelings? And I mean, you've talked to a lot of people in the conservation world. So just hearing kind of what people in those areas are feeling. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I guess what I learned most on that topic was speaking with Dr. Chris Servine, who led the grizzly bears were put on the endangered species list in the lower 48 in 1975. And then, a number of years later, he was called upon to recover brown bears or grizzly bears in the lower 48 for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so he would go to these town hall meetings, and, they'd get pretty wild. Sometimes, people have no grizzly bear signs, sometimes fist fights and whatnot. But what he said was basically, to first listen. People who are against bears and have concerns, just listen to them first, and maybe it's a mom who says, I want my kids to be able to go out and play and not get injured. And then Chris would say, well, as wildlife officials, we want the same thing. Or the rancher would say, I don't want bears killing my cattle. And then, Chris would say, we don't want that either. So you find that common ground. So I think just listening, hearing what their concerns are, and then just like speaking to them, so maybe someone's afraid about hiking in grizzly bear country. You can just say, well, they're actually not primarily carnivores or opportunistic omnivores that mainly feed on, vegetarian sources. With the rancher, you can talk about the carcass reimbursement program or the carcass pickup program, because just because you see a grizzly eating a dead cow doesn't mean the grizzly killed the cow, so some of that, if a cow dies, getting him off the landscape, because if he's just sitting there, he probably will attract some bears. But just hearing what the concerns are and answering them, and again, engaging the community. So everyone's kind of supporting each other, but also bears with food storage and all that type of thing. Yeah. So I think one thing, we mainly hear about grizzly bears in the news when there's an attack, which is really about 1% of the time. Most encounters don't end with an attack. So there's the 99% of bears that we don't hear about. So it's just, that's what this book's trying to share, that secret life. But also that's what I would try to share with these people in these new communities, just so they learn about the other aspects of bears.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And when we talk about concerns and then these reintroduction efforts, I think one of the concerns, which you touched on a little bit, is people hiking in the outdoors and in these spaces and in these national parks. Being an adult has its high points. Like, you can eat ice cream for dinner anytime or go to bed however late you want. But it's not all fun. You also have to do your taxes without going to jail and figure out what's for dinner every single night. And you also have to make doctor's appointments. And for that one, there's ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors and choose the right ones for your needs and click instantly to book an appointment. We're talking about in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers across every specialty, from mental health to dental health, eye care, skincare, and much more. You can also filter for doctors who take your insurance, for doctors who are located near you and who are a good fit for any medical need you might have, and also who are highly rated by verified patients. You can see their actual appointment openings and choose a time that works best for you, and you just click to instantly book. Plus, ZocDoc appointments happen fast, typically within just 24 hours to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. When I need to find a new doctor, I use ZocDoc. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/NPAD to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/NPAD. ZocDoc.com/NPAD. I recently had my own encounter with a black bear in the Grand Tetons, and it was very interesting because we were walking down this trail and we kept hearing people say, "Hey, there's black bear on the trail, just so you know." And then it was a group of 3 people, came running up the trail, sweating, out of breath, terrified. They have bear spray. All of them have their bear spray out. And they stop and they're like, "There's a bear, be careful." And they've been running for a while. And they told us that they had this other plan. They were going to take a totally alternate route it was an extra 2 miles that they were going to walk to get out of this bear's way. And for us, we were in a group of a few people and we ended up just walking right by the bear. And it was right off the trail, sitting under a tree, and it just looked at us. And besides just looking at us, curious, it didn't move. It didn't make any, and it had cubs with her as well. And we just walked right by and it was fine. But I would ask you, what would be the better scenario in this situation if you find yourself walking by a black bear on the trail or a grizzly bear on the trail? What would be a better way to react to that? Because seeing people running in the opposite direction and clearly in severe stress and fear, and they just were not having a good time with this experience, what can people do to prepare a little bit better?
Well, yeah, I think number one, having like a pre-plan. So before you start your hike, just have a plan of what you're going to do. And then obviously carry bear spray. So it's good they had bear spray. You definitely don't want to run because you're like mimicking prey. And we can outrun a bear. Like a grizzly bear can reach up to 35 miles an hour. So you never want to run. But I think, if we were hiking, it's knowing bears too. Like bears, everything they do is like they're measuring the caloric return from the energy expended. So that's why they're primarily vegetarian, because it's the food that's most predictable, takes the least amount of effort. They're not primary carnivores. They'll feed on carcasses or maybe some elk calves, but chasing an animal expends a lot of energy and the chance of success is pretty low. So bears will use trails just because it's the easiest way through the forest. So a bear on a trail and even a bear walking in your direction doesn't mean it's a predatory bear. He's probably just being smart and taking the easiest path. You see bison doing the same thing with the road in Yellowstone. They're always on the road. So I think the best case there is if you're with a group, pack it in tight. You can get the bear spray out and just, it should always be deployable within 3 seconds. And then if the bear's on the trail, just, looking at its behavior, a lot of times a bear will stand, which is not, it's not standing because it's about to attack. It's just standing because it wants to get a better look at you, or maybe get a better scent, a better smell. And then just give them space. So if, the bear's on the trail, which I had up in the North Cascades with a black bear, it was, eating some berries. Me and my friend Dina, who's a park ranger, we just took a really wide berth around it. So that's what I'd recommend. And if it's a grizzly, I'd go really wide, at least 100 yards, and then try to reconnect back to the trail. And then as you're doing this, just look for any signs of stress within the bear. If it's stopping to eat, or if it's, starting to get a little anxious, then, just pause. So it's kind of like a give and take, but the main thing is don't run, stay as a group, pack it in tight, and just give them a lot of space.
On the topic of bear spray too, because I think it's so easy to go out and buy bear spray, but actually using it is totally a different animal in itself, because it's different than just regular mace where you just press the button. There's a safety on it. And I think a lot of people who buy bear spray don't necessarily know exactly how to use it or how to deploy it in 3 seconds. And you teach classes that involve teaching people how to deploy bear spray. Could you give a couple tips just for people listening on how to properly use their bear spray if and when that situation arises?
Sure. Well, in the book, I took a bear safety class from a Navy SEAL, and he's all about just practicing. So there are practice bear spray cans you can practice deploying, but the main thing is not having the can in your backpack. It needs to be close, deployable within 3 seconds. So get a can of inert bear spray. You can just practice, pulling, grabbing it and discharging it, and just try to make it natural, and just so you don't even have to think about it. So I like my bear spray either on, if I have a binocular harness, a bino harness, underneath, or maybe on my backpack strap, the chest strap, or maybe on my hip, just somewhere close. And then what I recommend and what we use in the fire service, especially wildland fire, you have this idea of trigger points. So, hey, if the fire comes here, we're doing this. So with a bear, I give it space, and then maybe the bear doesn't see me and I just quietly go about my way. Maybe the bear sees me and maybe I just, make a little noise, hey bear. But then if the bear's approaching, I have these trigger points. So, I do this. If he's still approaching, I do this. When he gets under, 30 feet, if he's still coming, because it could be a bluff charge. So just kind of have a series of actions to take, and then knowing when to deploy the bear spray, if that makes sense. And it's pretty fluid. It kind of depends. Is the bear walking towards you? Is it a curious subadult? That's going to be different than is a bear charging you as far as when to deploy it.
Well, and that goes back to reading the room, reading the situation,
Sure.
reading bear behavior, and obviously familiarizing yourself to the best of your ability with bear behavior. And of course, as we've talked about, bears are individuals. There's always going to be the chance that they don't follow the typical bear behavior norm. And obviously you should be prepared for that as well. But just in general, knowing the animal that you are sharing space with and what is normal, typical, atypical behaviors is going to be to your benefit and the bear's benefit in the long run. So with that being said, obviously in your book, you cover so much more than what we've spoken about. Everything from Fat Bear Week, and we didn't even get into the poaching and illegal wildlife trade that you cover. And there's just so much to your book. And I think a big part of how the reason it was so easy to read, as far as I sat down and read it in, kind of just a day, is because it also reads kind of like a travel blog. I mean, obviously you said you visited all these places, but the way that you write about it, it's like we're going on the journey with you to all these different places, which makes for not only a fun read, but also educational and just informative. And even for people who aren't diehard bear people, I think it's for everyone. So thank you so much for taking all of the time and effort to write it and to bring it to everybody. And congratulations on another great book.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was fun to write and it's fun to share with people. And if my book helps human bear coexistence even just a little bit, I would be so happy and proud. And most of all, thanks for having me on the show. And it's always a thrill and an honor to speak with you. And thanks for all you guys do for our wild places and conservation and everything else. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. You are actually the first person that we've ever interviewed on the podcast. So this feels like a full circle moment where you're back with us, because you were the first person who ever came on and first author we ever had on. And now to have you here again, where you're writing another book and you've done so much exciting research into it. And it's so much towards things that we love too. And the conservation, it's so cool to have you back. And we're very grateful that you reached out to us and told us and wanted to come back on. And I know the people listening are also really excited and will be excited to read your book, which brings me to where can people find it and where can people buy it and when will it will be out very soon after we record this.
It's available for pre-order now, and it'll be available as a hardcover, an ebook, or an audiobook. And I'm not the narrator because I interviewed so many people, like 30 or 40 people, that I'm like, I can't do the voices for all these people. I'm not that talented on narration. But so yeah, it'll be out in those three formats, pretty much anywhere books are sold. I like to always plug like your local independent bookstore. So try to support them if you can. And there's always the online options.
Very cool.
Perfect.
Actually, when I was in the Grand Tetons last month, I was in the visitor center in Grand Tetons and I saw your book, Wild Rescues, when I was in there.
Oh, nice.
It was really cool. I was like, wait, I know him. I've read that book.
Well, I have the same thing. Like, I had some family in town and they just started talking about National Park After Dark. And I'm like, I'm actually speaking to them next week. And they're like, Cassie and Danielle. And, so you're like kind of rock stars out there.
Oh, no way. That's so cool.
No, it's fun to.
That's a really cool.
Yeah, see all your success. And, I opened up the New York Times maybe a month ago or a month or two, and I saw the podcast highlighted there. So yeah, congrats again.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah,
that was a shock to us too. We didn't know.
We didn't know. We were on our trip. We were in Peru, and one of our travelers was like, "Oh, congratulations on the article."
Their mom sent it to them.
Yeah, we're like,
"Oh yeah,
wait, what?" And they're like, "You're in the New York Times."
Sure.
Oh, are we?
Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
Yeah, that was a cool moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you back on for your next project if you decide to go down that way. I know you're like, want to take a breather probably, but
sure,
we'll see. And so everyone should go pick up a copy, Grizzly Confidential. Kevin Grange, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me. Had a great time.
Thank you so much for joining us again this week. If you have a trail tale or story suggestion, send us an email at stories@npadpodcast.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at National Park After Dark and on Twitter at NPAD Podcast. Join our Outsiders Only community on Patreon or Apple subscriptions to listen ad-free, unlock monthly bonus episodes, and exclusive content.
And remember, when you support our sponsors, you are supporting our show. For our exclusive discount codes and source information from today's episode, check out the show notes. For more information on our show, our book recommendations, merch updates, and more, visit our website at npadpodcast.com. And please rate, review, and subscribe from wherever you listen to podcasts.